Good afternoon. I'm Alan Reinhardt, president of the Nantucket Civic League, and we're here this afternoon to give you a little preview about the forums that the Civic League will be doing. The Civic League was founded in 1903. We have been involved over the years in creation of a number of different programs in the town, different projects, things like the Conservation Commission, the Nantucket Civic League, among other projects. One of the things that we do is to inform the public about projects that will have an impact on the quality of life here on Nantucket. We do this by means of supporting forums. We have, of course, Meet the Candidates and Meet the Articles. Those are our two signature events that we hold in March. And we also do a series of forums throughout the winter. The forums that we've chosen to do this year, two of them. In January, on January 26th, we're going to be doing a forum that will be focused on the two major capital projects that will be coming up at town meeting. We'll be talking about the new elementary school, or plans for the new elementary school, and also plans for the new fire station. And Peter Morrison, who's here, are the vice president of the Civic League, will talk about the January forum and the issues that we'll be discussing there. Lee Saperstein, who's on our executive board, will be talking about our February 23rd forum, where we will be discussing the finances, different possible ways to finance this, and of course the implications as well as of not doing anything as far as these two major infrastructure projects that we have. So, without further ado, let me turn it over to Peter.
Thank you, Alan. Let me begin by saying that I know something about the new fire station in detail, having served on the fire station work group, and I've also followed the proposal for the new elementary school, looking at it specifically with reference to the enrollments that are on the horizon. So I know something about that, although not in as much intimate detail. The January forum is designed to lay out what I think is a much more complete picture than one would envision originally about a new fire station or a new school and why we need it in the community. And I like to characterize it as two very, very big projects that, when you think about it in the right frame of reference, constitute an orderly upgrading of infrastructure in this town after a lot of delays, kicking the can down the road, so to speak. And let me take each of them in order. First of all, the new fire station is about a lot more than putting up a new fire station. It's about modernizing how we deliver the services that the fire station or any fire station nationwide is looked upon to deliver in a community such as Nantucket. When the fire station was originally opened back in 1979, we're in its present location, Nantucket was not the place it is today, and the science of firefighting and emergency service delivery was not in the state it is today, and the expectations that we have today did not exist the way they do today at that time. At that time, the fire station was staffed by a large coterie of what are known as call firefighters. That is to say, you have a core staff, and then you have a bunch of people who are ready to drop what they're doing at a moment's notice in an emergency and come and help. That era has largely passed. We have a core of call firefighters, but nowhere near as many. We have about a third or a quarter as many as we did. Secondly, when you think about the emergency services that are delivered today, you think of the fire department as putting out fires. They don't do very much of that anymore because most of the fires that they used to have to put out are now prevented. The number of fires that the fire department had to respond to in the last year or so is about a quarter of the number that it used to be back in the 80s, the early 80s. So that's a good news story. The cost of driving that success is having a community in which we have installed alarms and all sorts of fire protection and prevention systems that are now part of the life as we know it. We have smoke alarms that we didn't have in the 70s and 80s and all sorts of things. So what happens is the fire department is called upon increasingly frequently to respond to what could be an emergency but often proves not to be one, but they have to be there. And so the kind of business that they're in has been really transformed by technology. And at the same time, the emergency service vehicle that is responding to you when you say there's been a cardiac arrest or there's been an automobile accident, that thing is much more like a rolling hospital on wheels. It's not exactly that, but it's much more like that than it was 20 years ago. And it has to be staffed by people who have been trained to use the technology. So in a sense, what we're talking about is looking at how safety and fire prevention and emergency services are delivered in the modern world, bringing ourselves up to the standard that we as a community want to have. And I think we want to maintain a standard that is above average, which is what we have. And then asking, well, if we're planning to do business that way, and if we're envisioning a future where we know that Nantucket is different than the Nantucket of 1980, what is it that we need? What do we need as a physical structure? And what we need is a physical structure that, first of all, is in the right location. Secondly, is sized for not just now, but for going forward. And one of the reminders I would give you is that when the original fire station was opened, it was maxed out in terms of capacity. In other words, it was full to the brim in 1980 when it started. And it's grossly undersized right now, and it also is a situation where basically I think it's fair to say that the study group, fire station study group, was unanimous in concluding that the fire station is simply outmoded in terms of its ability to function in today's world. Outmoded in the sense that it is in itself in violation of codes that require it to have enough space for this and to have fire safety and so on. So that's the situation we have. And we have concluded that the best location for the new fire station to be constructed is at 4 Fairgrounds, partly because the location is right and also partly because it's a kind of plug-and-play situation. 4 Fairgrounds was first constructed and designed so that there could be a fire station, but we decided not to pay for it and build one at the time the police station was built. But all the stuff is there, the wires to connect, the central heating and air conditioning, and of course all the communication stuff. So everything is ready to be centralized there. And also, if you ever drive by the fire station where it is now, you'll notice a lot of vehicles parked outside in the weather. Not a good idea for a lot of equipment because it won't last as long. And there's just a need for more space. To park things, there's also a need for facilities that can accommodate female firefighters. And remember that we are obliged legally to hire the most highly qualified candidate for a position. So if that candidate happens to be a female and we say we've hired you, but there's no place for you to sleep or to shower or anything else, we're in violation of the law. We're looking at it prospectively, a lawsuit. So those are all the reasons we need a new fire station. Now, in addition, there's some very exciting things happening that kind of surround this physical structure. One is that we have had a Worcester Polytech student team studying all of the things that matter in terms of how you deliver services and how it's possible to improve those services. We have, on the one hand, a problem of traffic and congestion in the summer, so it's very difficult to get any piece of emergency equipment from where any fire station is to where the action may be. We also have on the distant horizon the notion that we may have, we're going to see a transformation in kind of the geography of economic activity in Nantucket. We know that there's a lot that's going to happen on Old South Road. We also know that there are outlying areas that need to be protected. And the idea came up in the new fire station work group that perhaps we ought to be thinking about a satellite station. Well, if you're going to have a satellite station, where would you put it? What would be the optimal place to put it? Nobody knows. That's something that has to be researched. That's something that we can look at going forward, and perhaps in 5 or 10 years we can say, you know, there are some places where if we had a satellite location, and that can be either a place where you have a miniature fire station, or it can be a, as it were, a forward deployed position where you park an ambulance and a fire truck under circumstances where on a busy July or August weekend where there's a big crowd, you know something might happen and you'll have it right in place. All of these things are kind of dynamic, research-driven issues that can be answered. And the Worcester Polytech team has amazingly in their semester here come up with kind of a prototype for answering those questions. We now know how to simulate what would happen if we were to put, let's say, a fire station north of downtown so that we could service the areas you know, around Cliff Road where we know that it's hard to get through the town to get to those places. So a lot of exciting things happening, and I just want to emphasize that what's going on here is not just a fire station, but it's really a transformative development in how the Nantucket Fire Department delivers its services, and delivers it with basically about the same number of people that it had 20, 30 years ago. They've been doing it amazingly, but they're bumping up against a ceiling where with some degree of frequency, they're concerned that they will have exhausted their capacity when yet another alarm comes in, and they will not be able to immediately respond. It may be delayed by 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes, which in the world of cardiac arrest is the difference between life and death. So just to close out what I have to say about the fire station, I think it's really important for the public to either attend the forum or at least to watch it on TV, because there's a lot that they need to understand about this so that they will be able to cast an intelligent vote either for or against going forward this. My own personal feeling is that this is the right time to make the investment in upgrading the capital, you know, upgrading the infrastructure for the town. But let me turn next to the school, where my familiarity there is to some extent confined to to foreseeing what the enrollment will look like going forward in the future. What we know now is that enrollments have gone up considerably in the school, and I like to refer to it as the failure of success, because the school has been so successful and so good that it has attracted and is apparently retaining all sorts of children who are the children of, in many cases, of newcomers to the island, in many cases immigrants who are seeking, you know, seeking jobs here. And what they're discovering is when they enroll their children in the Nantucket school system, those children are getting an education far superior to what they could get in their home communities, wherever they were. So what we have is a situation where enrollments are burgeoning, especially at the entry levels in the kindergarten and first grade levels. We are absorbing students who have particular needs. They need to be given special attention so that they are able to learn English and able to function speaking English and understanding in English so that they can succeed and benefit from the education that they're getting. And we are, for better or worse, a community that has to look at this and say, what's the right thing to do? And I think the right thing to do is to say, we need to have the necessary capacity classroom-wise in order to do the right thing and to teach them properly. And my read on the planning that has gone into this school is that I've heard a number of rounds of it, you know, as it has evolved, listening to it as a member of the Capital Program Committee. And I'd like to say that I think the thinking that has gone into this has been very, very thorough, carefully conceived, and has envisioned many of the contingencies and uncertainties that lie in the future. And this ranges from how do we improve the way kids are dropped off and picked up? We have a traffic problem. There's a possibility that there might be able to reroute that. How do we deal with the future of enrollments? There is a firm that was hired to do an enrollment forecast. They have come up with some numbers that one can use to size the school. What I know, and I think what Superintendent Kozort knows, is that this is really, when you go out into the future, this is to some extent an unknowable quantity, and you have to hedge against maybe building a school that is large enough for today, but when you look at it 5 or 6 or 7 years downstream, you say, gee, I wish I'd made it 5 or 10% larger, because now we've outgrown it again. The one thing I can tell you that we're not in danger of is facing a problem that some communities on the mainland face when they're stabilizing, which is to say they've got excess capacity. We're not going to have any school that has to be closed down or sized down. The plan envisions the prospect of, under one scenario, if enrollments continue to rise and then level off at the level below what the maximum would be, there is a ready use for the 1 or 2 rooms that would be available, because the vision there is that we begin to think of the school as a community education center in the same way that we think of the Athenaeum. So it's not like there's going to be space that would be wasted. So the bottom line there is, I think it's a well-conceived plan. It's an expensive project, and at least one of the questions that people have had is, why is it that the cost keeps going up? Every time I hear about it, oh, it's another $1 million, it costs more. And there's a very simple answer to this, which is that Superintendent Kozort never put a price tag on it. He never said it was going to cost $40 million or $50 million or whatever. He said, we don't know what it's going to cost because we haven't worked out how much space we need, and let us work that out, and then we will get a cost estimate. Now, on the Capital Program Committee, we had to plug in a number in order to say, well, it's going to be a big project. If we don't know what it is, we don't have any way of accounting for it. So there was a consensus, let's figure it's going to cost this much. So the number has gone up as the planning has gone forward. And it is now at a point where we have a firm number, and we can say this is what it's going to cost for X number of square feet that, after careful deliberation, we think is what we're going to need going forward, and that's going to keep us housed for the next 10, 20 years. All right, so we've got that number. Now the question is, well, what is it going to cost? Well, are you going to start tomorrow? I don't think so. Are you going to start next spring? No. Well, every year that you push off starting it, the cost goes up about 2.5%. So if it was X million, as soon as we know when we're going to start it, it's going to be X times 1.025 million. That's why the number keeps changing. So we want to put a firm number in place. We are now in a position where we can say, okay, if we can decide we're going to build this school, and we're going to decide we're going to start building it in this month, and we're going to have it finished in this month, then we know what it's going to cost, and then we can go out and say, okay, we're going to get some long-term funding that is going to make this happen, and we're going to, as we're doing on the Capital Program Committee, smooth the funding. That is to say, we're going to take out a kind of funding that only towns and cities can take out, that says we want to avoid the peaking of the cost. We want to just kind of smooth it out so it's a little bit more, and as the tax base goes up and as the value of Nantucket property increases over the years, as we all expect it will, we'll have property that is generating the dollars that are needed to pay for this. That's kind of the picture we have. So that's what the public needs to know about the school, which is we need it. We're obliged to educate these kids. They are our future. We finally got it pinned down so we know what we're doing. We have a plan. We say we're ready to do it. We're ready to execute it. And we have a strategy for funding it that is not going to cause heartburn for taxpayers. I've seen the numbers, and I was astonished at how we're able to moderate just by funding things the way they should be funded. You can think of it as a taxpayer might say, well, I need to put a new roof on the house. We just got done putting in a new dishwasher. I paid for that, but now we got this big expense of the roof. Well, you don't go into the checking account and say, do I have $10,000 in there to spare? No, you go out and take a home equity line of credit and you spread it out over the years and say, I'm going to pay for it for this number of years because I know I need the new roof, and the cost of not doing what I was planning on doing is far more expensive. Not building a school, not having the fire station is far more expensive in the long run, kicking it down the can another year, than planning for an orderly upgrading of the infrastructure that we know that matters. And I'll close by saying that it's important to keep in mind that the fact that Nantucket is in the very top of the list of all 3,000 and something counties in the United States in terms of its property value. We are #1 county in the United States. The real estate here is worth more than any other county in the United States, and the rate at which we tax ourselves places us in the bottom 1 or 2 percentile of all counties. So if you imagine a continuum where Detroit is at one end of the continuum, and there is a hypothetical end of the continuum at the other end, we are about 99% of the way at that end, and what we're talking about doing in the worst case scenario is going from at this end of the continuum to maybe 1 or 2 percentage points in the other direction. We're still 98 percentage points away from Detroit, Cleveland, Buffalo, any place like that. So if you don't upgrade your infrastructure, if you just keep the status quo the way it is, the reason that property values keep going up in Nantucket will start to moderate. There won't be quite as much of a push for real estate to go up because the quality of the community will not have been maintained at the level it has always been maintained at. And it's important for people to understand that keeping the infrastructure up to date, having superior schools, having a superior quality of life, and having superior services delivered here is in no small part why the property values keep going up. And that's not a process we want to interfere with. So if you take the long run view of this, and that's what I like to say, I'm always looking from the 30,000 foot level at the big picture. I rarely descend below that. This is where we're going, and this is how I would suggest people should think about this process, which is we have a long-term set of objectives, which is to keep this community centered on the values that it has for high quality service, high quality education, and a property base that keeps going up, even though many of us may be house rich and dollar poor. Nonetheless, you don't want to interfere with that process. And so going forward, it's important to be informed about what is at stake here in terms of going forward with these two projects, even though they seem to be extraordinary in terms of their cost. These are projects that we can afford if we do it in an orderly fashion, and that is what the Capital Program Committee and the Finance Committee are in the midst right now of kind of working through.
And to that end, that brings us to Lee Saperstein, who's going to talk about the February 23rd forum, which will deal with different possible ways that we can finance these pretty significant projects.
Alan, thank you. And for your benefit and the benefit of anybody who might be watching this, what kind of background do I have in this? I'm not a banker. I was, for many, many decades, an engineering faculty member at 3 prominent universities, the last of which I was an administrator at Missouri University of Science and Technology, a very fine institution teaching in the STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Our budget was approximately the same size as the town of Nantucket's. So as a dean and administrator at Missouri S&T, I was also very involved in making decisions about how money should be spent. And so let me just take a second and suggest to anybody who might be watching this, the people of the town of Nantucket, organized through the annual town meeting, approve or disapprove our budget. And we're hoping that in the February 23rd meeting that we will lay out a lot of considerations for making this decision. Now, in the end, there's only money. nickels, dimes, quarters, dollars, or millions of dollars. But in budgeting, we end up putting it into two separate pots. There's the operating budget, which we often call the recurring budget, because year after year, you're going to be spending much the same because it's people's livelihood. The operating budget goes primarily to salaries, indirect costs like insurance for our workers, and then things like fuel for our vehicles, maintenance of our vehicles, utilities. The electricity bill has always been something of concern. That's all in the operating budget. When we buy something major, and I believe the definition of major is more than $50,000, it's got to go into the capital budget. These are capital items designed to last for longer than a year and costing more than $50,000. So the people of Nantucket need to understand why it is that you put something into the capital budget. And of course, Peter, you've given us a great history in why you would spend money. You used an analog that I'm going to contest a little bit. It's not repairs to your house, it's spending money to increase the capital size of your house. That's a capital budgeting decision. So why would we spend money on capital? In background or theoretical terms, it's because the item that you're looking at is worn out, it's fully depreciated, it's obsolete, it doesn't do what you need it to do because it was designed for an earlier period, or it's of insufficient capacity. And that might be, you buy your first car, insufficient capacity is I don't have a car, I need a car. Peter, you've laid out the case that we've got obsolescence, in some cases wear and tear, and certainly insufficiency of capacity.
Right.
They meet all the tests for why you would engage in a capital purchase. However, to spend that money wisely, we need to know as well what would happen if we didn't spend that money for the capital budget. Again, the metaphor or the analog with our cars. As cars age, they sometimes use more fuel per mile. They frequently go into the shop more often. They're less likely to pass the annual inspection. And so the repair bill, which is an operating cost, goes up. And in the town of Nantucket, the operating costs for not doing something will be hidden inside of our regular operating budget. And only by careful analysis would we be able to tell you how many millions of dollars extra per year are being spent because we haven't bought something new. So once we make this decision to purchase, and I believe that the first forum, the January 26th forum, will lay out the case for or for not making that purchase, then the February forum will rely on your Capital Projects Committee to discuss what are the options. We don't have that amount of money in our back pocket. I bought my house in Nantucket in 1979, and it was a good price. But by the time I retired in 2006, it was ready for that capital decision. It didn't have the capacity we needed, and I didn't have the cash that it would take to rebuild the house. Yes, it was a substantial rebuild. The house had been a rental for years, and it was not in very good shape. I took out a mortgage. That was a way of spreading the capital costs back into my own personal operating budget, which are paid for by the pensions and Social Security benefits that I accrue. The town will also have its options for how best to borrow money, how to minimize the interest costs on that borrowed money. And that's, if for no other reason, for us to learn a little bit more about capital markets and how we as people can better buy a car or better expand our house. I'm hoping this February forum will be very informative. It will also be very timely in terms of making the decision, which you as the voters of Nantucket will be asked to do if, and I encourage not if, but when you attend annual annual town meeting.
So on behalf of the Nantucket Civic League, the dates for the two forums, January 26th and February 23rd, two forums dealing with these major capital projects that the town is looking to undertake. The forums will be broadcast on NCTV 18, Channel 2, after the taping, and they'll be taped, they'll be played back over the weeks prior to town meeting. Again, it's very important that you pay attention, that you look at, that you inform yourself about these very important issues, and of course, that you show up for town meeting beginning on April 6th. On behalf of the Civic League, thank you for watching, and we'll see you at town meeting.